Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of IDEAChatCNY. I'm Tom Charles, and I'll be your host this week. For those of you joining us for the first time, IDEAChatCNY is a bi-weekly web series hosted by the RVD IDEA program at Syracuse University. We sit down twice a month with inspiring and innovative entrepreneurs from across the world to talk about their experiences and try to help you along your own journey. Last time we were joined by Density co-founder Andrew Farah, so we thank him again for his time. And before I tell you a little bit about James, I want to encourage you all to tweet along with us at hashtag IDEAChatCNY. You can send us our questions and comments there, and we'll try to include them on the show. In the past, we've covered topics from startups, tech, design, media, restauranteering, and today we'll be talking a little bit about sustainability. James, before starting Solstice Power, used to work as an engineering project manager on a $40 million fiber optics telecom project for Verizon Communications, bringing 4G wireless internet across upstate New York. Shomar also spent time with Carrier Transicold as a test engineer working on a container ship refrigeration technology. While working as a test engineer at Sabe Census, Shomar aided in the development of civilian airport ground surface radar systems. A proud SU alumnus, Shomar received his BS in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in entrepreneurship from the Whitman School of Management. While an undergraduate, Shomar founded Syracuse University's Formula SAA race team, a collegiate motorsports team which designs and builds their own race cars every year to use in the annual SAE Spec Formula race car competition. He now volunteers his time in the Falcone Center for Entrepreneurship at the Whitman School of Management, where he offers advice to student entrepreneurs and provides feedback on student college courses and programs. And I know James is actually going to be a little bummed that I bring this up. I know he's a modest person, but he's actually among the semifinalists in the 43 North pitch competition in Buffalo, at which he has a chance to win $1 million. So we'll be rooting for him throughout October. The community is very proud, and I wish you the best of luck. So James, thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me.
And if you want to get started, you could actually just give us a little bit of a background about how you got started with Solstice Power, where the technology came from, etc.
Sure. So basically, I think a lot of it came from my family background, not to be overly personal, but I came from a family that's immigrated to this country. I'm a first-generation American. And my grandparents were originally Palestinian, my father's Lebanese, so I come from a family that's survived 2 civil wars. And so to come to the US and be able to get an education and that sort of clean slate, to me was just an incredible opportunity. And I wanted to seize that to do something that I thought added real value to society, really developed the standard of living of people. And so naturally, I kind of found sustainability as part of that. And I took a class my senior year in engineering. It was in sustainability, of course, and found that existing solar technologies had a lot of difficulties, had a lot of technical challenges to overcome, and weren't really up to the task of getting us to a fully sustainable energy infrastructure. And then naturally sort of was curious about what could be done in order to develop that further, and kind of stumbled into entrepreneurship in a little bit of a way where I found it was sort of a venue that gave you incredible power and freedom to innovate, to create sort of systemic change that you don't really get in a lot of different venues or opportunities. And then that pursued me into the Master's in Entrepreneurship program at SU, which was incredibly beneficial, both to get the complementary background, but also the resources that were available. So that was, to me, the motivation was that if I were to stand up on a soapbox in the corner and yell at everybody to buy solar panels, nobody's going to do anything.
Right.
But if I could create or innovate and create a product that I could sell to people, that creates adoption, and that will inevitably sort of create change in a more sustainable energy infrastructure. Sort of taking what Apple did with the iPhone and trying to do that with sustainable energy technologies. That's the concept.
Right. So you actually redesigned the way the panels are designed, like are laid on the.
In a way, it's really a different way of thinking about solar panels to what you're probably used to. Most solar panels that you see are flat. I mean, they're only like this thick, and they're just covered with these silicon cells. What we use is kind of like, you can think about using a magnifying glass in your backyard to start a fire or something like that.
Right.
And by doing that, if you take a lens that's this big, well, you can focus the sunlight into a solar cell that's maybe a square centimeter. And that significantly reduces material costs, significantly reduces the amount of space and solar cells that you actually need. And that allows us to use much higher efficiency solar cells. You can capture more energy with less area. And that's extremely beneficial. It just turns out for higher energy density markets, larger energy consumers.
Right.
And then the additional benefit being that, because when you do that, you get a lot of heat buildup. We capture that heat and then utilize it. So, if a customer needs hot water or space heating, air conditioning, or even some sort of processing heat, they can be supplied that through our systems all in one sort of tight, unique package.
Right. So your product is actually really unique and really innovative in the sense that you reduce costs, but also offer them heat and whatnot as well. So, but you're participating in this market, in this industry that's very slow and has a lot of big players that are resistant to change sometimes and maybe feel threatened by it. So the point of this week's talk is actually those challenges and how you've been able to overcome them. Sure.
First thing I would say is to heavily be invested in PR in a way, to establish credibility for yourself and a good reputation for what it is that you're trying to do, especially considering there's a lot of crazy ideas out there, to come to terms with the fact that it's not going to be sort of a one solution beats all problems kind of deal. I think it's going to be a plethora of different solutions. But I mean, on that point, I mean, just to hone in and hammer down what the scale of what you're up against in something like sustainable technology, it's, we just broke 2% this year of all, we were talking about this beforehand, 2% of power built or generated in the US is solar power. I mean, the world champion of that is Germany. It's only 15%. Couple that to the fact that, the rest of the energy infrastructure is basically 130 years old. It's run by utility monopolies, that's sort of like unheard of in capitalist market.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, that people are supplying energy are all fossil fuel companies who often round out half of the wealthiest companies on the planet.
Right.
So it's quite a big challenge to go up on.
And how do you compete with something like that?
Yeah. It's very tough. And that's not even counting the political toxicity that just surrounds sustainable technology. So PR is one thing. Being able to innovate and create something that's of true value has been the other thing. So there's often the element of we're able to serve the societal interests in terms of helping to combat CO2 emissions and climate change and things like that. But in addition, provide a package which can reduce costs for specific markets, and which, to meet individual needs, which is basically what capitalism is based off of. That's the economy works. So being able to satisfy both sides of that coin has allowed us to maneuver down that line better than other technologies or other attempts and people within this sort of sphere. That's sort of the way we've attacked it, is solving both sides of that coin, both problems.
Right. So like you said, you guys really do create a lot of value, but then with that comes the threat of somebody else trying to capture that value themselves. And I know you're in the process of trying to get a patent, but in the meantime, you still want to grow your company and as quickly, like not just grow it, but grow it quickly. So I was hoping you could speak on both the process of protecting your IP and then also how important it is and any challenges that you faced trying to tell people about your product without telling them exactly all the trade secrets and whatnot.
That one's always interesting.
Point. Especially as you do this PR.
Yeah, so that's a big question. So first, we are actually in the midst of filing patents. I mean, it's important to do a patent search. You're always going to want to do that, both on yourself and have a good attorney. So finding a good attorney who's willing to sort of invest in you is really important as well, especially if like you're younger and you're a student or something like that. Milk that for what it's worth, because or find an alumni, somebody who's willing to do it, because it gets really expensive. Really, they'll charge the air in the room.
I've heard that before.
So it's really intense. Patents always have a lot of, at least in my experience, there's a lot of misconception about patents. So in order for something to be patentable, it has to be novel, has to be non-obvious, it has to be useful. And what sometimes is often misconstrued is the fact that you might have something that's valuable to a market that isn't patentable, or something that's patentable but isn't useful to a
Right,
market.
right.
And so an example would be, if you create, say you understand existing technologies and how to hone it better to better produce, say, some sort of computer chip, right? That's not patentable, really. It'll be tough for you to find a patent around that because you're using existing methods, existing technologies. But even though you're offering something of extraordinary value to the market, it doesn't fit in within the patent framework, which typically likes like a specific kind of product or methodology or material or something of that nature, one kind of point that it kind of hones around.
Right.
And that was a challenge for us because a lot of our innovation is more systemic. It's sort of the systems analysis. It's combining different components in the market to find new innovative ways of solving problems and providing additional value in both heat and electricity, for instance. It's in our business model. It's in a lot of these different things that don't fit well within the patent framework. And you'll run into those problems more often than you think. And so the way we went about that was, well, first we realized that having a patent is in some ways more important to an investor than it was necessarily to us, because we knew what our true value is, and that's more difficult to communicate to an investor who's very stuck on patents. So we wanted to go down that road anyway just to protect ourselves. So the way we did it was sort of, if you break down what it is we're doing, what's its most basic element, that one sort of turning point that everything kind of revolves around, that if it wasn't working, nothing else would work. And that's what we found in the way we mount our solar cells. And that's what we've pursued patents on, at least to this point. We have plans for additionals.
How many are you in the process of pursuing?
Right now, we're just doing one.
Okay.
Just because, like I said, that's sort of the big crux of everything. And we have some plans for additional elements as we go down the line and components of our system. But we just want to get that first big one out of the way. Right. Because that in itself is even valuable to potential additional markets or people who aren't necessarily direct competitors to us that we could even license or something. Right.
That's a big thing too. So you mentioned now twice the idea that these solar cells are valuable to more than just the market you're dealing with. So I personally know that you're selling to large energy consumers like hospitals and hotels. But I was curious if you could speak on the process that went behind the thinking between you and your partners to specifically pursue those markets instead of maybe the average consumer or whoever else might be interested.
So this is a great example of where strong market research and industry knowledge is we really did a lot of research into past solar market in general failures, renewable energy failures, and ones that were somewhat in line with what we're trying to do. And some of the similarities that kept popping up were, first off, 99% of them are run by engineers or physicists who come up with the idea and then start a company based around that. And because everybody uses energy, marketing and trying to find a target market product fit is often left as an afterthought. They're just like, we'll find some place to put it backwards. So what we did was sort of the flip side of that.
Because that's not always effective.
No, it's very
difficult. It is effective?
No, it's very difficult.
Exactly, because if you sell to everyone, you're not catering to anyone.
Exactly. That's a big, in any market, but particularly when you have such odds against you. You got to get every step of it exactly right. And in this case, when we were looking at the broader market, 50% of all solar panels in the US are big solar farms out in the middle of nowhere, connected to the grid, basically like a solar power plant. Like that. Additional 33% are installed on homes. That's probably what your people are most used to. The rest of that is mostly sort of smaller scale commercial municipalities, things like that. By contrast, the market we're looking to serve is just 1.4% of solar installs. And that's basically to do with, first off, their inefficiency. So 16% of the available sunlight that hits a panel is converted into electricity. That's it. So that means you need a lot of quality real estate space in order to produce a decent amount of power. And in the relative spectrum to a large energy consumer, they just don't have enough to produce even double-digit percentages of what they need. So that was a holdback. It was mostly just sort of a marketing PR kind of deal for them. Then there was a heat element, So the heat was another big thing. If you were, A dairy processing plant needs, to go through milk pasteurization, things like that. You need a lot of heat in order to do that. And that can be extraordinarily expensive, especially if you're outside of a natural gas area. So current solar panel systems, you have to choose either or. You have to dedicate a certain amount of real estate to one or the other.
I see.
You can't do both.
I see.
So you get into this sort of like, even if you were to go all out, you only get so much electricity. If you sort of divide between the two, you have to compromise even further.
Right.
So what we noticed was, well, with our package, we're 3 times the efficiency. So that's a third the real estate space of what you would need for something else. And then there's the benefit of heat. So we're able to provide everything that they need to actually provide a decent amount of energy, as well as the right energy mix that they would need for these larger consumers. And that's why we targeted those kinds of specific markets that use a lot of electricity and heat within our temperature.
Right. Now, are there any downsides to this on the flip side? Are there opportunities that you feel like you may be missing out on? Or are you still young enough that you don't necessarily know?
Well, there's always the unknown.
Right.
It just is. So the nice thing about having it be applicable to a lot of areas is if we strike out on one, there's another one that we can try on. So what eventually sort of hits a home run is sort of to be seen, because we're pre-market right now.
Right.
But in the grandeur of things, everybody uses energy. So what seems like somewhat of a broad market is actually somewhat of a niche for us.
Right.
But it's definitely, we plan to expand to future markets as we get in. It's mostly like, what has the biggest ROI? What market can see this the best? Let's attack that smaller one first. Right. And we'll expand to the bigger one. Right. So we'll have like a growth plan basically for the company. Right. But if you don't have a foundation, you can't build a house. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
So I mean, if you're selling to things like something like a hospital,
sure.
In one you're innovating in a very much dominated market, but you're also selling to dominated industry, selling to slow moving markets. So a hospital may not be the quickest to make a decision on trying a new product, especially if none of the competing hospitals have tried it. They don't want to be the first to take the risk and then fail.
Sure.
What steps are you able to take to kind of create that customer development cycle and make it go a little bit quicker?
It's always really tough to accelerate the process. The first thing we've done is we're starting early. So I'm already in conversation with potential customers and things like that. And we've technically sold, we have a letter of intent for sale for our first one. And so once you get one, now somebody has some more confidence that, okay, these guys bought one, maybe it's not so bad. So that helps. But particularly in those kinds of long buyer cycle markets, establishing a strong relationship with someone is even more important. So like, to use an analogy, you might be able to buy a pack of gum or a bar of soap from some vendor you've never really met before, but you probably wouldn't buy your house or a car from some random guy off the street. You typically, the bigger the purchase is, the more of a relationship you have. And so this is a prime example of that. So we're utilizing solar installers that are local to the area so that they can maintain a close relationship with people and things like that. But a lot of it's really going to be trial and error in a bit of a way. There's always going to be those sort of early adopters. And so we reduced our investment costs necessary to keep positive cash flows in anticipation of something like that.
Right.
Best practices will be developed as we continue into the market, really. I wish I could have a better answer than that.
Right. So since you are still at such an early stage of the customer development cycle, I know a lot of your funding has come through grants. So for other people out there who are trying to do similar things, if you could speak towards how to get money through grants and how to know when it's actually a source of revenue that you should pursue versus maybe not going that route.
Sure. So grants cover a very broad spectrum of things. Right. Anything from renewable energy to, I've seen things like with the USDA, people who make like little oxidation things for chicken farms and stuff like that. I mean, it's just anything that's technologically associated, you're usually pretty good at finding a grant. The one thing to anticipate is it's not easy. It's definitely not necessarily free money. There's usually a lot of strings attached to it, so you have to be cognizant of that. Local funding is often easier to achieve. It's smaller, but the cycle is shorter.
Right.
So if you're applying, say, for like an SBIR, you submit it, you hear back 8-10 weeks from then, another 8 months is when you start your project.
Wow.
So that's a really long cycle in the
Yeah.
relative spectrum. That's very difficult to build a business off.
Yeah.
And so you have to be mindful of those cash flows.
Right.
The reason we pursued it is that we found, first off, that we've been very good at bootstrapping ourselves and maintaining a decent amount of cash. I mean, we've had to go through a lot of sacrifices in order to do that, but we've been able to manage. So it wasn't such a pressing issue that we needed a large amount of capital. What we've been able to do on a small amount of funding would probably have taken other solar companies 6-7 figures in order to do. So we've taken some lessons learned there to do that. But the additional benefit is that by going through non-dilutive means, our goal is to get a commercial-ready product without providing any equity. That reduces investors' risk and increases the valuation of our company. Which is important for us because our long-term vision isn't just this one product. It's to establish a foundation where we can innovate other products.
Of course.
And so having an investor that's aligned with that vision is really important. And often those are going to be the ones that are going to want to mitigate risk and things of that nature. So we've tried to think out that whole process and align ourselves with that strategic direction. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. Great. So at this time, I do want to remind anybody following along that they can use the hashtag IDEAChatCNY to send us your questions and participate in the conversation with James. And James, so you keep saying we in this process because you and two co-founders, correct? And all three of you have an engineering background. So I was wondering if that ever creates some sort of tension or actually a lack of tension when you're trying to deal with things that you may not be so knowledgeable in about PR, like you said, or marketing, advertisement. How do you go about finding the resources that you need outside of that necessarily R&D area?
There's a lot of nuances to the answer of that. So first is we have two partners in addition to myself. We all do have an engineering background. However, our skills are actually more complementary than you would think. So our chief technology officer, he's a very theoretical kind of guy. He did the heat transfer analysis on our solar cell mounting assemblies and stuff like that for patents, whereas our chief engineer is much more of an applied guy. He's the nuts and bolts sort of deal. And then I took some more of the business sort of elements. So we have fairly complementary skill sets, but just enough overlap to where we can each understand what's going on and nobody feels kind of left out. We also have a really just genuinely good relationship, very open. And I think that's extremely important. I mean, we just had a retreat last weekend, actually. We went through everything. I mean, everything. We had like a good 4 or 5 hour meeting just flushing through everything we could possibly think of, from salaries to who's getting what amount of equity to how you can leave to different investors, everything within our operating agreement. Even a communications plan. We've gone over that multiple times. Your technology is going to develop. So having that really strong, cohesive kind of team is really important. It's not easy to create, but to fill up other gaps, I would definitely seek mentors. So we have a running advisory board. This is kind of a cool trick I learned through is just a lot of people are hesitant to join an advisory board because of the time it creates or time it usually takes, as well as the fact that, if you can't provide them equity in return, there's little incentive. So basically what I have is like a running listserv. I'll send them email updates every once in a while with certain questions for certain people. So we have engineering CEOs, we have angel investors, we have various people who are just connected with investors. We have energy specific related people, we have solar people, we have CPV, which is our technology, a lot of spectrum. So I can ask various people different questions. And most people are pretty on board with something like that because it's not a lot of time commitment, but it's still really effective. And it's very, very helpful for you to establish those kinds of relationships. We took advantage of some interns. So we have 2 interns right now that are helping with some of the day-to-day and a lot more of the marketing elements of that. So we focus on our core competencies and find partners where, maybe we don't have some. So we have a lot of strategic partners that are helping develop our technology. So we have people in HVAC who know a lot about heat transfer and things like that, and have provided some resources and see complementary products that we can eventually provide. So a solar panel that powers their heating system or air handler or whatever. We've done the same thing with contract manufacturers to find solar installers, to find solar financing people and stuff like that to fill in those gaps and reduce costs. So, really just sort of filling out all of the skill sets.
Right, and widening the network.
And creating a network around that and figuring out who you can pull to get that. I mean, you might not know someone directly there, but maybe somebody you know who knows somebody who knows somebody knows somebody does.
Right.
And you kind of have to be a salesman and that sell yourself and your company.
Another thing that I thought would be useful to talk about is, as an engineer, and a lot of my engineering friends, they like to tinker and they like to build things, but they don't necessarily always have this interest in entrepreneurship that you have. But they want what they built. They don't want to just do research and have it sit on a file in some academic bookshelf somewhere. They want it to actually hit the marketplace. I was wondering if you could offer some insights on other ways that students can create a product and then either license it out, or ways that they can have their products hit the marketplace without necessarily starting an entire company around it.
So you're looking at almost like technology transfer ideas, although not necessarily university owned. It depends on, so that throws in a whole different mix. If you're like a PhD student, you develop something at university, they often take a certain percentage of it, and then you get a percentage of royalties or however they end up doing it. So there's, you can sell or license intellectual property.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, you got to have, in our current economic environment, it has to be sort of a problem solver, has to satisfy some sort of market need. So it's all great to have a really cool technology, but if your interest is in sort of immediate commercialization, it's best to really be looking at knowing markets, knowing industries, and finding problems, and then figuring out what the best solution is to that. Sorry about that. That would be the best way of going about it. Now, when in terms of how you commercialize that, so I'm doing some side brokering for some people to help them do just that, because a lot of technology transfer stuff, like you said, just sits on the shelf, even though it's can be potentially very valuable.
Right.
So finding those companies where it's in really their best interest to want to license or buy that sort of technology is a bit of an art and science as well. But it's very similar to sort of starting a business in certain regards. It's just that you're selling it almost immediately. Right. So it's one big sort of sale, but you also have to do the market research and stuff behind it and figure out, what are their potential benefits out of that. Otherwise, they're just, you're leaving it up to them to figure it out.
Right, and they're not going to put the time to that.
But yeah, not necessarily. I mean, they could, but you want to pull in somebody's interest, and you're narrowing your focus to very, very specific individuals. If that's the case, you really want to cast a broader net than that. And the way you capture that interest is to show them all that research. Not to mention, it shows what you're talking about, and that this is real product need, without letting them, maybe you think of something that they didn't think about in terms of satisfying some sort of market or something like that.
Right.
I know that's sort of a vague answer, but I think
you need to know the specific technology to answer any more detail.
It's a little bit more dependent on the details, in that regard. But generally speaking, always be thinking about the business that's going to wrap around that when you're developing it.
Right. Great. And then one of the last topics I wanted to touch on with you was you actually started this company while still in school, and we see a lot of students at Syracuse University doing the same thing. What are sort of the difficulties that you faced in that, and how did you maintain a balance between your social life, your education, and then on top of this, your new job? Or did one of those, probably the social life, just kind of disappear?
Time management is always huge, right? I mean, there was at one point, when I first started it, just to give you an idea how bad the economy was when I graduated my undergraduate, we had like 50-something students in engineering, mechanical engineering. This isn't like, with all due respect to the arts, pottery or something like that, where it's very difficult to find a job. And mechanical engineering, we had like 55 students, 7 of us had jobs or were going to grad school.
Wow.
Day of graduation, that's it. The only thing I could find in the meantime, because I knew I wanted to go and get my master's, was at the plumbing department of Lowe's.
Solid.
Yeah, great, making minimum wage, which is not easy to live on, by the way. So, and I remember working my business plan during my lunch break and stuff like that. So you kind of have to be really good at time management. But I mean, in the fall semester after that, I was working 35 hours a week at Carrier. I was going to school full time, and I was working on Solstice.
Right.
And so, man, it gets really hectic really, really quickly. But if you're able to really just focus on the tasks, plan things out as you would expect, and not get caught up too much in little day-to-day things, bite it off in chunks and things like that, you can get through that. And eventually it gets easier as time goes on.
It's almost like you need a chopping block of what's going to be the first thing to go when shit hits the fan.
You gotta prioritize things. So, if you're doing, it's really easy to get caught up in, say, like random emails or something like that when you're doing your company or whatever. Right. But, always have that big picture in mind. It's if what you're doing isn't the most valuable thing you can be doing towards the bigger picture, then go to the most valuable thing.
Right.
And when you do that, eventually you begin to make enough progress, so hopefully you can start to make more and more time for what it is that you're trying to do. Partners are huge for that. Have a strong relationship with your partners is enormous. So, for instance, our CTO, he's currently a PhD student in electrical engineering. Our chief engineer is a full-time job outside of this.
Oh, wow.
Full-time on it. But because we have such a good relationship and we've been able to work our time around that and be flexible, they're still committed to this, and we're still making a lot of progress, and they still add a lot of value to it. So, you kind of have to, in the same way you're innovating a product, well, you have to kind of innovate within your time management of how you take care of that.
Right.
I think that's probably the best way I've kind of gone about that.
Right.
But seeking mentors as well that have gone down that path is also very helpful. They always give you little tricks and quirks.
And they can point you away from mistakes they know you're about to make or expect that you're about to make.
That's why I always emphasize doing sort of research on what was there. I've done it myself in terms of heading down the wrong way and then having to switch. It's not, failure is really just the perspective on it.
Right.
You tried something, it didn't work, you try something
learning
else.
Experience.
The learning experience. It's really what it is. But the more you can learn ahead of time, particularly solar was a great one, because there's been a lot of successes, but there's been a lot of big catastrophic failures, like Solyndra, for instance, or whatever. But if you can take what they did wrong and learn that saves you from having to go down that path.
Right.
And so the more you can just learn of what's out there, the better you are. Because I know a lot of people just get very excited very quickly when I come up with an idea and just commercialize it right away. It's worth the time and effort to do the market research, to work with customers and try to tailor your specific offering to what their actual needs are, to learn from past failures and success stories and gain the mentors who have the knowledge that have been there. It's worth that, building that foundation before going forward, because that hour you spend doing that going to save you 10, 100 hours later on. Guarantee it.
So due diligence, as always.
I guess you could call it due diligence, but it's more just learning. It's really what it is. It's learning. And I know it's sort of a pain, but once you get past that first element of like, okay, I got to do this, it becomes a little bit more fun, and you can kind of see where the holes and the gaps are.
Cool. Great. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, James. If you do have any more thoughts to share, this would be the last moment to do so. Anything useful for students and young professionals about to get their career started?
Sure. I try to use this analogy a lot in terms of going towards your own personal success, however you define that, whether that be financial or some sort of societal thing, what we're trying to do. I often use the analogy of a car. So think about those sort of hard skills, things that you learn within your education, learning about your market, all that market research and things like that. That's sort of the mechanics of the car, the actual physical thing. Then learning to innovate and have that kind of a perspective of looking at things in new directions and new ways. That's sort of like the driver, right? He's the one that's sort of steering the ship about where it goes. But I would say passion is like the fuel that drives you. That's what's going to get you over that huge, daunting hill. That's what's going to accelerate from stoplights when you have those kinds of failures or setbacks or some sort of barriers, things like that. And that's what's ultimately going to allow you to be persistent. So, a lot of sort of being successful is I'm learning, particularly from people who've been there. A lot of it does come from luck, but luck really, in my own definition, would be when opportunity meets preparation. And if you can get all those three parts of that car, and you're passionate enough and persistent enough, eventually you will meet that opportunity. And that would be my biggest sort of piece of advice, is to keep that passion. That's really the biggest part, because that's what's going to allow you to get everything else.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time, James. To follow James on Twitter, you can use at James Shomar, easily enough. And you can visit solsticepower.com to find out more about his company. Thank you for tuning in. Please join us on October 22nd when we talk with Peter Herbert. And to follow IDEA as a program, you can go to @IDEAChatCNY. Thank you. Have a good night.